Hello, it's What the Doodle here, and in this session, it's just a quick update on the Hyperfetch project. And if you wanted to know the genesis of the Hyperfetch project, you can watch my last video, which was entitled, "Oh no, Neofetch is dead." And since then, there's been quite a lot of good progress. And in this session, I just wanted to go over that progress. So if we jump over into the actual code base, this is the main entry point of the code base. And a lot of things are now working. So for example, we have the kernel detection where we use the underlying libc uname call, system call. And from the kernel, we're also able to then do higher level things such as the operating system detection. And once we actually have like the operating system and we know what that is, we are able to slowly then look into the distribution, the specific distribution detection. And if we jump over and have a look at that, what you'll notice is what I've done is essentially taken the bash script that does the distribution detection, and it's fairly involved because simply of all the various different permutations that you have, and there's so much inconsistency across different distributions and different platforms and systems, and for that reason it's obviously quite involved. And what I've done is I've actually put that code there simply because I can actually reference it quite easily, and then I've started to sort of chip away at that, and then create essentially the Rust equivalent, if that makes sense. One of the things that's been done, for example, is all of the Ubuntu, the various different flavors, so it's able to dissect and find that specific variant of Ubuntu that is being used. If we go back to the main entry point, the other thing that I've also started adding is a conditional flag or an optional flag, which allows us to essentially override the ASCII art that's shown for the various different distribution, which is very good in terms of when doing testing, when you're testing out different ASCII logos. And what happens is the logo itself is able to self-report its width and its height, which is important because we now have the full ANSI layout working. So all of the information is laid out nicely, somewhat similar or almost identical to the original Neofetch. Now, the project aim is not to be an exact clone of Neofetch because, as I mentioned, it is 11,000 lines of code and it does a huge amount of things. And what I'm doing is also skipping out some of the hardware platforms or some of the operating systems, for example, iPhone and Mac and those other things. My hope is if this project becomes remotely popular, then other people can get involved. It is open source at the end of the day, so hopefully other people can get involved and start helping out and chipping away and adding those respective platforms or operating systems. So at the moment I'm focusing purely on Linux, simply because that's my main driver that I and the main operating system that I run and I'm most familiar with. For that reason, that's where I'm mostly focusing on. But as mentioned, a lot of the things are now working, and for example, even have the uptime as well now actually working. So it's calculating all of the uptime and then doing some pretty painting and a bit of logic around in terms of doing plurals and singular. So for example, you don't want to have minutes versus minutes if it's only 1 minute, and hiding away that unit if it's, for example, 0, because that's what the original does. As I mentioned, there's a bunch of operating system, for example, Solaris, Haiku and Darwin and BSD and things like that, which isn't implemented at the moment. Simply because, as I said, I can only focus on so much at a time, and at the moment the main focus is really on Linux, and that's what's happening. So if we can actually see this in action, so if we bring up a terminal, so if we actually just run it as is, we can see that it's picked up the distribution and the operating system, it's picked up the kernel, and also it's showing us the calculated uptime as well. And what I wanted to show as well is that we can, of course, run the flag to show a different distribution. So for example, if we wanted to show Ubuntu Mate, which is interesting because people think it's Ubuntu Mate because it's MATE, but apparently it's pronounced Mate, so Ubuntu Mate. So if we run that, and here we can see it's overridden that automatic detection, and it's showing us a different ASCII logo. And in fact, let's do Arch, for example, if we wanted to debug and see Arch, for example. So here we can see again it's overridden the ASCII art, and now it's showing the logo for a different distribution, which is absolutely brilliant for debugging, or in the case that, for example, perhaps the automatic detection failed and you could potentially pass that as an argument flag. It follows the same argument flag as the original. However, clap, which is the library that I'm using in Rust in order to do the argument or the code argument generation, because it passes the structure and it turns it into the arguments automatically. At the moment, it does this weird thing where it takes anything that's as an underscore and turns it as sort of a dash instead of an underscore. I'm pretty sure I'll have to look through the clap documentation, and I'm pretty sure we should be able to force that so that the flag matches identically to Neofetch. As I said, at the moment I'm not focusing on that simply because Hyperfetch's aim is not to be a one-on-one dropping replacement for Neofetch. I mean, in the future we could try and go towards that, but that isn't the aim. The aim is to be a minimal viable sort of similar to Neofetch, but just a minimum. I mean, I'm sure there is a lot of other information things that can be enabled and disabled, but I'm just going with a minimum set. And that is essentially all I wanted to show you for this update. So hopefully until the next time, I'll see you on the next one.